Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. Joining me tonight is Mike Lynch, and if you want to learn more about him later today or tomorrow or during the show, you can go to www.mikelynchbooks.com. Anyway, he's the author of After the Cross, and it was a very good book, I thought, in my opinion. In fact, it was reminiscent to me of some of the Dan Brown mysteries, which I've read all 4 of them. Well, actually, I think he's got 5 now, and including The Lost Symbol. But yeah, it was a very interesting book, a very interesting theory about how the cross could be found. But he did let us know that this is a work of fiction, and it's mostly for entertainment and speculation. But it's still a very, very interesting read, and one that I would definitely put into my collection, and it's got a lot of value in it to me. Now, also, for those of you that are listening at another website, if you want to listen over here, join our chat room. It's www.paranormalpalace.com. And the chat room is free, and the membership to the site is free, but you have to get a free membership and sign in order to be able to type and chat. It's for spam bot protection. And also, if you don't see the player, then that probably means your plugin is, you'd either have it downloaded the plugin for Windows Media Player, or the plugin is not yet enabled because in Internet Explorer, it comes as part of the browser, and it usually has a window pops up that asks you to install it. So you can always Google whatever the name of your browser is and ask for the plugin for ActiveX for Windows Media Player, and it'll take you to a download page for that. Also, if y'all want to call in, the call-in number is 832-632-7904. Mike, I got to tell you, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I want to thank you for looking me up over there at Blog Talk Radio.
Well, I just thank you for letting me on the air and talk about my stories a little bit and maybe a little bit about writing and just have a nice conversation.
Well, I got to tell you, you look like you've been doing some writing for quite some time. What do you have out now? Something like 4 books?
Actually, altogether, I have 5 books currently out.
Okay. And I noticed you had a list of your books on your website. I just got a miscount or forgot to count from the last time I was there. I got to tell you, I almost made a mistake. I had trouble finding your website because, there's a Michael Lynch that used to be the host of Paracast Radio, and I almost got the 2 of you guys mixed up.
Nope. I've never hosted my own radio show before, so that's not me.
Yeah, I know that. I'm just saying it's easy with the name similarity to make a mistake, though. But at any rate, real quick, why don't you tell everybody what it was that interested you in writing about this particular topic?
Well, for me, ever since I was a little kid, I love history. It's always been something I'm very fascinated with, and I was actually, when I graduated from college, I was a history major, and that has just continued on all my life. I love watching the History Channel, and that's kind of my go-to channel when I watch TV to see what's on kind of thing. So I'm naturally drawn towards historical subjects just because of who I am. And it was, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was actually watching a documentary, I believe it was on the History Channel, and it was talking about Constantine's mother, Helena. Constantine was the first Roman emperor that embraced Christianity. He made it the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 300s. And his mother, Helena, converted to Christianity from what we would call paganism or Roman mythology. And she made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem around 326, 327, because for her, she read about many of the places in the Bible, and she wanted to visit and go to where Jesus walked and lived and did ministry and miracles. And when she was there, one of the places she naturally went to was Golgotha, where the crucifixion took place. And when she sees it when she arrives, she's horrified to find out that there's a Roman temple built there. And for her, that was just the worst possible thing that could have ever happened. And she orders it torn down. And as she tears it down, they find 3 crosses underneath the foundation of the temple. And they believe one of those crosses was Jesus' cross and the other two crosses belonging to the thieves that the Gospels describe. And so what they did was, according to the history, the documents we have, they find a woman who's sick and they lay her on all three crosses, and on the third cross she's miraculously healed, and from that point on that cross is referred to as the true cross, the one that Christ was crucified on, and it's kept in Jerusalem for many hundreds of years. And so when I saw this documentary, it just sort of got me thinking, it's like, you know, what would it be like if this happened today in our time? If somebody actually found the cross or thought maybe the cross still existed, and as I thought more about it, I thought, what a great story that would be, and then, boom, there's the book.
So actually, at least that part of your book came from historical sources.
Yeah, one of the things that Brandon and I did, and Brandon Barr, he's the co-author. I wrote it with him. It's not just my book. We included flashbacks in the story that were primarily historical events of things that really did happen. So the first scene in the novel is the crucifixion of Christ. That's where the cross comes from. There's the Helena scene where she goes back and allegedly finds the cross of Jesus, and then there are other historical moments in the story, and those things really did happen, and we include them into our story to give it really a unique flavor of, you know, that there is cross history that's written about that a lot of people don't realize that go beyond the Bible.
Well, I had personally read the story of her claiming to have found the cross. I had not known it in quite the detail that you had known it in, but I probably had not saw that particular documentary. But I got to tell you, you and me got something in common. I used to spend much time in front of the History Channel. It was kind of like my go-to channel for a long time, until it seemed like I saw all the documentaries and they were repeating, and I just got away from the TV altogether.
Yeah, well, they still have some good stuff on there. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff they show again and again, but they always come up with new programs that I pop into from time to time.
Yeah, I need to find a better way to keep track of it. But, yeah, is there any more parts in the book that was gleaned from history rather than, speculation or?
Well, there's another scene that we included in the story. It took place around 125, where there was a Jewish revolt that, because they hated the Romans and they were trying to get rid of the Romans at every opportunity. And they first tried in 70 AD, and that's when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, and then the city was burned, and the population suffered, pretty cruelly under the Romans. And then about 50 years later, the Jews rose up again and rebelled against the Romans, and again Jerusalem was burned and sacked, and the governor at the time basically expelled all the Jews from the city because he just had enough, and we're not going to deal with this anymore, and actually changed the name for a time to something more Roman. And it was at that time that the Romans built the temple on the site of the crucifixion. So that actually did happen, and we include that moment of history in the story where it explains where the temple actually came from.
So that leads me to wonder if she did find, okay, you told me earlier, for example, before the show started, that you didn't know if I wanted you to mention this on the air, which I have no problem of it, about your theory about Helena finding a cross, but not necessarily a true cross. At the time, we didn't discuss this part having come, that much of it from history. If she did find three crosses underneath the temple, you would think that one of them would have to be the true cross, wouldn't you?
It is possible. It is possible. I'm not going to say I know everything about, Roman history or Jewish history and declare either way. That was the place where Christ was crucified was the place where criminals were crucified. It was outside the city, and that was the location that they did that. And so there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were crucified in that area of Jerusalem. And so it's very natural to believe that there would be crosses there that were not being used anymore, because I think they have the cross, somebody's crucified, they died, they probably used it again and again and again, until it just wasn't useful anymore. You can only put so many holes in wood when you can't use it anymore, and they probably just cast them aside and just left them there because they didn't need them. And so I would imagine there'd just be leftover crosses in that area anyway, and just possibly that's what she found. Just
unless they took them down and stored them when they weren't using them and tried to keep them, which we have no way of knowing if they did that or not.
Right.
But the thought does occur to me that you'd think being outside like that if they weren't taken in, because, this incident with Elena, if I remember correctly from the book, happened in 1127, which was some 1,100 years after Christ's death. 1,100 years is a long time for wood to rot in the rain and termites to get it and stuff like that if it wasn't being taken down and cared for.
Well, actually, Helena was in the 300s, so it was 300 years after the Christ.
You're right, because Constantine started Christianity in 365. I'm getting her probably mixed up with the Saladin story.
Right. Yeah, Saladin. What happens is there was the Crusades. The Christian armies take Jerusalem back from the Muslims, and for about a little bit less than 100 years, they're in control of Israel and Jerusalem. Well, Saladin, who's a Muslim general, starts to fight back, and there's a famous battle in 1187 when the Crusader army is crushed by Saladin, and that's when he captures the cross that the church at that time believed was the true cross. And then it disappears from history. Nobody knows what happened to it after that. My feeling is that he probably just burned it or discarded it because as a Muslim, the cross meant nothing to him other than just, for propaganda purposes of showing how Islam is superior to Christianity because they have Christianity's most prized relic, the cross of Jesus. And so for him to destroy it would be just a blow to the church.
Which we know the cross was very important to more than one group back during those days. In 365, Constantine wanted all his soldiers to have them on their shield. The Knights Templar wanted the cross on their uniforms, I believe it was, and a lot of other groups, I think, as well, wanted to sport the cross to signify that they were on God's army and also maybe to show God's favor on them in battle.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Constantine, he allegedly has a vision before a very important battle where he sees the Chi Rho, which is the first two letters of Jesus' name in Latin, and he supposedly heard a voice saying, "In this name you will be victorious," and so he immediately orders all of his soldiers to paint the Chi Rho on their shields, and he wins the battle the next day. And so he took it as a sign from God that God was on his side.
So what is Chi Rho? Basically a kind of like an offshoot of the Greek Christos? Yeah,
of Christos, which is the Greek version of Christ, and the first two letters are for us it's CH, but for them it was CR.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling because it sounded very similar, in other words. And we know Christ was a pretty common name in more than one form of the time. But, I noticed what you did, though, was very interesting compared to, I think Dan Brown even did it in one of his books, but I'd have to go back and reread it. You had that one part in the lab, for example, where this one guy had deliberately hired on people just to create a arguing faction to cast doubt. And I thought that was a pretty clever idea.
Well, what happens in the story is there's an archaeological dig that happens, and they find a letter. And in the letter it says that the cross of Christ still exists, and it's been hidden away. And, of course, they're not quite sure where it is, because if I said at the beginning of the story where it is, there's no story. So there's a bit of a mystery of where is it located, if it still exists. And so there is a very wealthy man who is threatened by the cross's discovery because he's sort of fronting this other guy in this national election in the Ukraine, and he's fearful that if the cross's discovery is made public, then that's going to sort of there's going to be a groundswell of religious fervor in the country, and the opposing candidate is sort of a man of the people, a man of faith, and he fears that will really help his opponent, and he wants his guy to win. And so he sets up this group of archaeologists and linguists and so forth, specifically to discredit the letter, so that it's basically deemed a fraud, and then the whole mystery goes away, and then his guy wins, and he gets to enjoy more power and other illegal things that happen in his life, and that's sort of his motivation for wanting the cross not to be found.
Which, that would make a lot of sense. You got to remember over there in Israel and Islam and all that area over there, even to this day, they're at war, in other words, and, any type of Christian relic could be found offensive in the Muslim lands, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean it's you just see the news every day. I mean, what's going on today? It's there is the movie that was made, putting Muhammad in a very bad light, and Muslim countries are just rising up in righteous anger because they are very offended by that. And so it doesn't take much to set something off that can cause a lot of problems for people. And so, if there was a holy relic found in a sensitive part of the world, that can create, actually that just sort of reminded me, there's a moment in the story, in the book, where one of the archaeologists goes to a man, he works in a museum, and she wants to use his facilities, the lab, to examine the letter, and he's very fearful because this is taking place in Turkey, and he says, we're a Muslim country, and if it gets out that we're trying to help, I help you find a Christian relic as important as the cross, that can cause problems for me and a lot of other people. So he's very fearful for the same reasons of just what the Muslims are going to do if they find out, kind of thing.
Well, like I said, would be pretty understandable. But one of the things I would like to ask you about that, because it's been my experience during all my time of doing radio shows, that most authors, even if they're writing a work of fiction, they usually like to embed a little something of themselves in it, maybe send a little message here and there, or, hope, put something in there they hope people can benefit from. Did you do something like that in this book?
Well, one of the things that Brandon and I, as we were writing the story, one of the things that we make a point in the story is, the cross itself. How do people view the cross? For some, it's just a piece of wood and it's not special at all, and for others, it's a sacred object because, in the Bible, it declares that Christ was crucified on a cross, and 3 days later he rose again, and he's the Son of God, and so the cross is very special in a lot of ways. And like you mentioned before, just the symbol of the cross is used in many different faiths for variety of meanings behind it. And so, the cross is sort of the universal symbol of the church, whether it be Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox. The cross is sort of the central object, and one of the things that we have the characters talk about is, well, what does the cross mean to you? How do you see the cross? How do you view the cross? Is it the cross itself that's important, or what happened on the cross that's important? So there's a lot of sort of discussion of that in the story.
Yeah, there was a lot of that discussion, especially between Colt and Mallory. Anyway, pardon me, that I was noticing. Now, one of the other things that I was going to comment to you about is while I was reading the book, I developed a definite impression that you're one of the more open-minded Christian people. A little less like the fundamentalists. You seem to be open to ideas that a lot of people that are fundamental are not open to. Did I get the correct impression?
Well, I try to be a level-headed believer. I try to be a person who is open to ideas and thoughts and comments about, because my faith stems from the Bible, and I try to have a good understanding of the Bible, but I don't claim to have all wisdom and knowledge, and I don't think anybody can either, but sometimes they sort of come across that way of, I know the answers and I don't want to hear anything else. I'm always open to listen, and if I think what they're saying is true and has validity, then okay, I'm gonna agree with it, and if I feel that it goes against my understanding of what the Bible says, then I'm not going to agree with it, but I'm not going to scream at you and shout at you and say you're bad things. It's like, well, we'll just have to disagree on this. And so I try to be a reasonable person when it comes to matter of what the Bible says.
Which that was kind of the impression I had, which I think is really a great thing because I think people like you're a better witness for God than some of the other people that are, well, they think they know it and there's no way to listen, and anybody that don't agree, they're, well, not the best way to say it, but they're on their way to Hades, in other words.
Right.
I don't think that's much of a witness in my opinion.
No. Well, and Jesus himself said, how are people going to know who my followers are? If you love one another. That's the test. And so if we're critical and judgmental and condescending, well, what kind of a message is that? That's not a message that Jesus would espouse.
Well, there was actually about 2 places in the book that I picked that up from. One of them was on toward the end when Joseph made the comment about his church being a place for people of all faiths. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people in a lot of churches that would not want to welcome just anybody from any faith, in other words. And I was like, but that could be reflective of this guy's feeling that, all people should be welcome to come and worship the Lord, in other words.
Exactly. I agree completely. I belong to a non-denominational church where I live, and the center of what we believe comes from the Bible. That's the core of our belief. And so we have people from a variety of backgrounds, and we just teach, it's like if the Bible says it, then that's what we're going to teach from, and try to understand it to the best of our ability. So I'm very comfortable with that.
So a lot of non-denominational folks would not reject a Buddhist or a Catholic or something of that nature.
No, if a Buddhist walked in the door and says, I want to check this out and see, this looks interesting to me, we would say, come, sit down and, listen, we'll talk. Let's talk about what we believe about the truth. And, that's what Jesus did. When Jesus was doing his ministry, who did he hang out with? He hung out with the prostitutes, the sinners, the tax collectors, all the outcasts of his society, and the religious leaders were infuriated by that. And Jesus says, well, who needs the doctor? The sick do. Not the well, not the healthy.
Well, that's very true. That's something that a lot of people I know of, they miss on that, and I didn't mean to get off track. See, I was raised by a Pentecostal preacher myself that I've drifted away, and I've gotten more into the Hermetic traditions and into spirituality, but I'm very familiar with church. Please pardon me. We've had a lot of rain over here, and it's getting to me. But at any rate, we got 4 days coming up dry. At any rate, I was going to say, I've gotten away from the actual church, but I'm very familiar with it because of growing up in it, in other words, in the environment. But I wasn't growing up in a non-denominational, so that could have been a whole different twist for me.
Well, that came later for me, because I was actually raised Catholic personally. And when I was in my teens, that's when I decided to not go to the Catholic Church anymore, and I started going to non-denominational churches. And so that wasn't something that I grew up with. I was very denominational when I grew up, and but like I said, for me, it's not what a person says about, or I should say, it's not a doctrine that I believe in. I believe in the Bible. That to me is the truth of God that we all need to follow. Now, I'm not saying denominations are bad. I'm not putting them down by any means. For me, my personal choice is I prefer a non-denominational church that uses the Bible as the core of its teaching.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And, you're talking about being a Catholic. You really kind of took me back to my childhood. I'd go visit my uncle and aunt, and my uncle was an atheist. My aunt was a Catholic. And every now and then she'd take me to church with her. Mm-hmm. And just after going there once or twice, I decided I didn't want to be a Catholic because you were up and down, just like a yo-yo on the kneeling stools. And I was like, well, that's not for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of ritual, obviously, in the Catholic Church, and that's one of the things that I, at the time accepted because that was all I knew. But then, more in adult life, for me, there was a lot of emptiness and ritual. There was no meaning behind it for me personally, and so that was one of the things that I wanted to leave in the church. And so, where I go to now, we do have some rituals. I think all churches do at some level, but not near as much as in the Catholic Church. Well,
I would tend to agree with you, but I wasn't really targeting so much the rituals as I don't know, speaking from the perspective of a child, too much up and down can become monotonous, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But that leads me back to something else that I've noticed in your book, was speaking through Joseph, it seemed like, again. Well, no, it was his brother, I think, kept wanting to repeat, God is in the heart, God is in the heart, not in the wood. And, you know, God is in your heart, not in a non-denominational church, not in a Catholic church, not in a Protestant church. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were very deliberate when we wrote that for that particular character, because he has some information in the story that sort of moves the story along. There's sort of a dead end that they reach, and when they talk to him, he keeps talking about how it's not the physical cross itself that's important. It was what happened on the cross. For him, it was the act of sacrifice that Jesus made, and so it was just an instrument for his crucifixion. So ultimately, he could come back from the dead 3 days later, and then give people opportunity to have their sins forgiven if they embrace Christ as Lord and Savior. And so he kept focusing on, it's not the cross itself that's important, it's that the fact that the Son of God died on that cross. That's the most important thing, and that's the message that he's trying to communicate with one of the characters in the story.
And I also have to admit, your ending for that story, that kind of took me by surprise. I mean, the very, very ending, Colt and Mallory ended up, the job that they ended up accepting from Joseph at the very end. I'm hinting around at it, but I don't know if you want to reveal that part of the book or not.
No, I don't want to say what happens at the end, because that's when Brandon and I were writing the story, it's sort of like, let's say there's a movie, and the movie is, we're going to go find God in the movie, God literally. And the movie is going to be a disappointment for people on both sides. Either at the end they don't find God, and so it's like, well, then you feel cheated. Or if they do find God, well, our view of God that we have in our minds could never live up to somebody's portrayal of it in a film. For example, God is infinite, God is glory, God is, whatever, however you depict God in your mind, just the awesomeness of God. And a film just can't capture that. And so, again, you're disappointed. And we realize we're kind of treading similar territory when people are looking for the cross. And so we're promising a lot of, this is the cross of Jesus. Like we said, this is something very important for a lot of people. And so we knew the ending had to be the right ending. Otherwise, the story would fall apart, and people would walk away feeling like, this is terrible. This is a terrible ending. My hopes are all dashed. And so we were very, very careful how we made the end of the story. And I think it's a very poignant ending. I think it's a very touching ending to the story. And I think there's a quiet power in the ending of what happens, how the whole thing gets resolved. And so we felt we hit the right ending. That really is for the story. It's the way it should end, in our opinion.
Now, I thought it had a overall pretty good ending. There was a disappointing place, but I would be, again, getting too detailed. I could tell you later on off the air. But overall, it was really a great ending. The part I'm talking about is not really exactly at the ending anyway. It's a part of it, but not exactly there. But at any rate, there's also the fact that I saw much more depth embedded in the story than that, in as much as it dealt with people forgiving themselves, forgiving those that had wronged them, and learning the true meaning of the cross itself.
Yes, and we were very deliberate about that, because you have Colton, who's really the central character in the story. He's a man who's wounded, and it's sort of a self-inflicted wound. Some years before, this is sort of like backstory for the cross. He made a terrible mistake. He sort of was cutting corners as an archaeologist, and he made a bad deal, and he was ruined. And he's had to live with this guilt for many years, and he's trying to find ways to redeem himself and in the eyes of his peers. And then this opportunity comes along for him to work on the cross team to see if this letter is authentic, because he's a linguist and an expert. And one of the people that he's paired with, who's Mallory, she was one of the people that sort of done him wrong, and they're forced to work together, and he has to forgive her for what she did to him, because she's an opportunistic person. She's doing it for the money. She's doing it for the fame, and she's just treating the cross like it's a commodity. And she doesn't really have any remorse for what she did. But then over time, her personality starts changing as she spends more and more time with Colton and sees that he really has forgiven her for what she did to him. And so what he did to her, excuse me. And that starts to affect her as the story goes on.
Yeah, and then during the process of the story, he got a much deeper insight and look into her than what he had ever had into her before. And I think that this is part of what really helped him to forgive her, was that he finally began to understand what was motivating her to do the things that she was doing. Yeah,
she has a hard life. You know, her father died when she was young, and that really had a very profound impact on her life. And she was in a lot of bad relationships with men, and so she's kind of jaded. She has a hard shell. And so for her, it's just making, the quick buck, and, she works in the black market, antiquities. And so, she just goes to the highest bidder when it comes to her skills in sort of the dark world of black market archaeology. And so now she's maybe wanting to kind of change her life a little bit, and then enter Colton, and who's trying to be a man of faith. And at first she's very dismissive of his beliefs, but then she starts to respect them as the story moves forward.
Yeah, this is true. And, one of the things about that is that throughout all of this, she was getting in touch with parts of her inner self that had perhaps died years ago.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And at first she fights it. When she starts to realize that Colton is having more of an effect on her than the other way around, because she's used to manipulating men, she hates it. She doesn't like it, and she's trying to fight against it, but it keeps seeping in despite her resistance.
And she has quite a tug of war going on about that. Again, there's a lot of stuff in the book that I noticed was also Cloak and Dagger that was, I think, always makes for great reading when you read it. The part about the rich man that sent the guys after them, the other guy who remained a mystery right up toward the very end, who had hired an operative to get a hold of Mallory that had saved her, or actually had killed that one guy before she did. I think he was just about to kill her in a sneaky way while she was about to kill him, or something to that effect in the fight. But at any rate, he had showed up out of nowhere and then made an offer to her, but he remained a mystery guy throughout the whole thing. And the one thing I noticed is, to my knowledge, I never remember you identifying this. Well, can I name his name?
Sure, yeah.
Derek.
Yeah, he's kind of like he's just a sort of a prop in the story. He's sort of like he's a contact guy. But the person behind it is actually Pedrocheco. He's another significant character in the story.
Right.
He's the guy that's running for the presidency of the Ukraine, and he's made the deal with Zarko, who's the corrupt billionaire, the arms dealer, who's sort of fronting his campaign, and he has a wife who's dying of cancer. And when he hears that the cross may be found or may exist, he sees it as sort of like kind of like genie rubbing the lamp. I'll get what I want from it, and so if I find the cross, my wife will be healed. And so, even though he's a villain in the story, he's a sympathetic villain, and you feel for him because he loves his wife very much. He doesn't want her to die, and so, but he'll stop at any means. He won't stop at anything to get what he wants, and he'll kill people. And he's the one that hires the person to get Mallory to work for him, and sort of in a clandestine way.
Well, yeah, but the one thing you got to admit, he didn't kill him in the same way Zarko did.
No, Vladimir Zarko is pure villainy in the story. He's no doubt about this guy. He's a guy that will do anything to anybody to get what he wants. Yeah,
no heart whatsoever in that one. As a matter of fact, the one thing that seemed to me that kept recurring with Zarko was he wasn't an easily excitable type of person. He could kill you and be very calm about it, in other words.
Well, and there's actually a scene where that happens, where somebody has not followed through the way that he felt that that person should. He made a mistake, and Zarko kills him without any thought. His blood pressure is the same, you know.
Yeah, no emotion, no nothing, just business as usual.
Yeah, that's just the kind of guy he is. So those, I mean, even though it sounds bad to say this, but those are kind of more interesting characters to write than quote unquote good characters. Because if somebody is a good person, they tend to be not as interesting as a character than somebody who is more of a villain or an evil-based personality, because they can do things and say things that we would never say or do because that's not who we are. But we tend to gravitate towards those characters. We tend to be more drawn towards the villains of stories than we do the heroes of stories.
Kind of like the forbidden fruit.
Yeah, it's like in The Silence of the Lamb, Hannibal Lecter. I mean, you know, he's just a very charismatic character, but he's pure evil, and yet we're fascinated by him. You know, and not so much with the protagonist in the story. That's just our personalities. We tend to like those kinds of things. So they tend to be easier characters to write than a quote unquote good character.
So I've got to ask you, since part of your deal in the book was the message, what does the cross mean to you? What does it mean exactly to you?
Well, I've kind of shared my thoughts about it already. I mean, my belief about the cross is that it is an instrument that Christ died on it, that ultimately it was the sacrifice of Jesus that is the most important thing, that he died for the sins of humanity. And because we have rebelled against God, and God loves us so much that he wanted to bring humanity back. We're wayward children. It's like the parable of the prodigal son. We've gone astray, and he is wooing us back, and the way that he did it was through his sacrifice on the cross. And so for me, that's what the cross means to me. It's that it's a chance for me to have a relationship with God again that was broken and now could be healed.
Yeah, I remember you said that earlier, but I thought maybe perhaps you hadn't gone into full depth on it because you were just making a point about the book at the time. So I was trying to give you a chance to elaborate on it if you needed to.
Well, and it's like the question you're asking me earlier. You know, are there things that I personally, personal experiences, personal beliefs that work their way into the story? And because obviously this is the main, in a way, the main character of the story is the cross, in a sense, not a person, but the object. This is just an example of my personal beliefs, obviously being infused into the text, as it were.
Yeah. Have you ever given much thought to maybe perhaps the cross having a symbolic meaning as well as the meaning that you referred to?
Symbolic in what way?
Well, perhaps symbolic to like what the Apostle Paul said about crucifying the flesh daily. And I believe he's referring to the ego here. And, I don't believe it means like killing the ego, but, bringing the ego under the control of Christ, in other words. You think there could be some symbology in that?
Oh, of course, of course. Jesus himself said, if you're going to follow me, carry your cross daily. Die to yourself every single day. And because, for the readers at that time, when Jesus says carry your cross daily, they knew exactly what that meant because they saw it every day. They saw condemned men being led out to be murdered by the Romans through crucifixion. And so they had to carry their own cross to their own execution. That was just the way the Romans did it. And so, yeah, definitely there could be a symbolic meaning infused into the cross of dying to ourselves every day. And that's the battle we all face as believers is, am I going to follow God's will for my life and God's leading in God's direction, or am I going to follow my own? And every day we have to make a decision, who am I going to follow? My way or God's way? And I think that's a good point about the symbolic nature of the cross of dying daily. I think that's an excellent example.
Yeah, I was thinking that, it ties in with another teaching. I had it on my tip of my tongue, and somebody typed something in the chat room, and it caught my attention, and my brain went zip. You were talking a minute ago, had saw that there was something in the news about Jesus site swipe in an ancient script. And I mentioned to the chat room they may want to Google that. I couldn't put it in the chat room because the link's too long, and it spreads out and just spreads the scroll bars and shortens the names and makes your chat room look pretty bad. And he put in there, yes, I read it earlier today, and when he did, I went, so, yeah, I do apologize for that. Maybe it'll come back to me in a minute what it was I was going to say. Oh, I think I remember what it was now. I also remember on more than one occasion, I think it was Jesus said in the New Testament about destroying the works of the devil. And I noticed that every time he said that, I destroyed the works of the devil, now you must do so also. It was always the word, the works. It was never the devil himself. Which leads me to think that, again, the devil is tied in with the negative side of man or the ego, where Christ is tied in with the soul or the positive side. And I was wondering what you thought about that.
Well, I mean, the devil is our mortal enemy. I mean, the Bible makes that pretty clear. I mean, all the way back to Genesis in the garden, Satan is there tempting Adam and Eve to defy God, to eat from the fruit of the tree, to make them believe that God is holding something back. He's not giving them the best of the world that they have, and he's been leading us astray ever since. He's the Apostle Peter describes Satan as a roaring lion prowling around trying to devour people. I mean, I don't think that's a literal truth. I think he's being using imagery here, but he's using the picture of a lion attacking people because that's just his nature. He wants to destroy anything that's of God and truth and light. He is the enemy of that. He's the father of lies, and so he's trying to keep us from God. That's his mission in the world, and God is trying to bring us to himself. Hello? Are you still there? Hello?
Okay, Mike, can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Oh, Mike, I do apologize. I had muted the thing to cough, and I thought I unmuted it, and I'm sitting there talking to you. You can't hear me.
Nope, but I can hear you now.
Okay, now I was going to say, do you think perhaps that the devil is not like a separate entity, separate from our body per se, so much as like he's a part of our spiritual makeup, like a negative side?
I didn't quite hear the last part of it. I think you were coughing.
Yeah, I do apologize. But yeah, do you think maybe it's perhaps like he's more like a negative side to our spiritual makeup, kind of like an unclean spirit or an evil spirit, or the head evil spirit that dwells within us, much like the Spirit of Christ dwells within the soul of the believer?
Well, my belief is that Satan is a personal being. It's like a person, much more powerful than we are. I mean, the Bible seems to suggest that Satan was a created angel by God, and some even speculate that perhaps the archangel, the highest angel. And it seems to be that, from what the Bible describes, that Satan became very proud, and he felt that he could be like God, and I can run the universe better than God can, and he rebels against God because of pride, and then he's cast down. He's cast out from heaven and cast down to earth, I guess. Doesn't say exactly where he was cast down, but spends a lot of time here. And he's the personification of evil, in my opinion. He's a personal being. Now, he didn't rebel by himself. The Bible also seems to suggest that a third of the angels that God had created side with Satan, and so they're fallen angels or demons. And I also think they're also personal beings. They're like people, but not quite like us, of course. We see examples in the Bible where angels appear to people. They're the messengers of God, and they're like a person. They can assume human form, it seems. And I don't think it's any different for Satan, but Satan can also indwell people just as demons can. There's the example in the Gospels when Christ was arrested. The Bible says that Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, that he indwelt in him. And because, this was Satan's moment of killing Jesus, thinking once I kill him, then I've won. God lost, God loses. So he's able to inhabit people if they allow him to, just as demons can. So I don't think he's a part of us in a sense, like he's just, it's like the angel on our shoulder and the demon on the shoulder kind of a thing, and these positive, negative energies are fighting over us. I think they're, the personification of beingness. I'm sort of having a hard time describing it, but I think they're individuals.
Okay. Well, we got, looks like 15 minutes remaining. I was wondering if there's anything that you would like to cover that maybe perhaps I missed or didn't get around to.
Well, let's see. That's such a broad subject. I can probably talk about many different things for many different hours. Are you thinking more in the story or about writing or co-authoring or?
Well, about this book, since that's what you, mostly wanted to, do this show about. Now, like I say, I kind of don't like to stay up too late on Tuesday nights because I get up at 6 and get my son John off to school. But I was going to say, if you got a lot of other stuff to talk about, if you like, we can come back and do a Saturday show when we have more time.
Sure, yeah. I enjoy doing radio shows and talking about, writing and stories and so forth. So yeah, I'm pretty open to any subject that you might have. I mean, I'm pretty an agreeable person.
Yeah, you do seem to be like that, and I like your policy of agreeing to disagree, and let's love each other and be friends anyway. You know what I'm saying? It's a great policy to me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
But from right now, was there anything you wanted to add in about your book for this particular show?
Well, I also want to emphasize that I think it's just a fun adventure story. We've been kind of talking about heavy theology in the story, and that obviously is a strong element, but it's also a fun story. I really enjoyed writing it a lot. Like we talked about before, I've written 5 books so far, and I have another one coming out next year, so I'll add to the list, which is nice. It takes place in Jerusalem. It takes place in the Ukraine. It takes place in Istanbul, which used to be Constantinople, and parts of it in the United States. So there's a lot of international flavor to the story. There's good guys and there's some bad guys. There's mercenaries in the story. It's just a fun adventure, and I think a lot of people have described it as a quick read. I mean, you're flipping pages when you're reading the book because you just can't put it down. There's a lot of exciting moments in the story, and so I don't want to make it sound like it's this really heavy, dramatic, depressing, kind of a thing. There's a lot of fun and adventure in it too.
I'm glad you brought that up because you are certainly right about that. And I probably didn't bring out my interview in the way to, reflect that, and I do apologize because it's definitely a very extremely exciting story. It's got a lot of mystery to it, a lot of intrigue to it. If you like, like Dan Brown mysteries, I guess you could call them, or if you like say, Along Came the Spider with Morgan Freeman, only that was in a movie, then you're probably sure to enjoy this. It keeps you wondering what's going to happen next, right through the biggest part of the book. And, like I say, there's a lot of confrontations in it. People are having to use their wits and they're barely keeping alive. Last minute calls and stuff like that, So yeah, I think everybody would enjoy that. Now, what about your next book? What's it going to be about?
Well, one of the things that I probably do wrong as a writer is what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to stay, whatever genre you write in, stay in that genre, because then you build your audience, and as the next books come out, they'll buy the books, because like Dan Brown. If you think of Dan Brown, you think of like a certain type of story, or Stephen King. A certain type of genre comes to mind when you think of a certain author, and that's how you're supposed to write. Well, I don't do that. I write all kinds of genres. I mean, my first novel was a sci-fi novel. My second novel was a political thriller. My third novel was a fantasy, and then this one was an archaeology adventure story. So I'm kind of all over the map. And so my next novel is actually a sequel to my first book, which is a sci-fi novel. So it's just a continuation of the first novel that I wrote.
And what was the first novel?
It was called When the Sky Fell. It's sort of a classic science fiction story where we discover there's alien life out there, and of course they want to conquer Earth, as aliens generally like to do in science fiction movies. And of course they're more powerful than we are, more advanced, and we try to stop them, but we can't because they're way too powerful. And so we have to go to help from an unlikely ally of actually people we defeated in a war years before who are not our friends, but we have to team together and try to convince them that it's in their best interest to side with us, even though they hate us, and join and try to stop the aliens from conquering Earth. Lots of battles, lots of adventure, lots of ships blowing up and things like that. So
you like adventure?
I do like it. What the kind of story that I'm drawn to mostly, and they just sort of come out in different ways, is I like having a story where you have like one person, and the decisions that he or she makes has a profound effect on the lives of many, many other people. The story's always bigger than them, and if they make the right choice, then that benefits the people around them, and if they make the bad choice, then it works very badly for the people around them. And I tend to be drawn to those kinds of stories overall.
Okay. Well, I was right. We can definitely find some stuff to talk about in the future. I also do a lot in E.T. and other forms of, you might consider sci-fi, some would consider paranormal. Mine has more of a touch of realism, but it's not always, sometimes it is, and not always they're here to eat us or to destroy us, in other words. Some are, sometimes there to help. But that's a story for another day. Do you have any last minute thoughts?
It's hard to answer a question like that because it's so broad and I don't know how to pin it down. I enjoy writing. I'm glad people enjoy my stories. That's why writers write is so they can share their stories to other people. And so when they say, I really liked your book or I liked your story, that's why I do what I do. Because, writing is, as they say, is a very lonely profession. You're just sitting in front of the computer, you're typing, and you really hope what you're writing is interesting and provocative maybe in some ways or touches people. And then you put it out there and you hope they like it as much as you like it. And when people say that they do or that it meant something to them when they're reading about the story, then that's the highest praise I can ever get. So I always enjoy when I get to hear from people what they think of what I wrote.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, it's getting on kind of late now, and I got a few more loose ends to wrap up on my show, telling everybody about my friends I support, where we support each other, link exchange type things. But I wanted to thank you for coming on the show. You've been a fantastic guest, and, you're very easy to talk to. You're very knowledgeable, and you're a very sincere person and a very open person, and I can really appreciate having you here.
Well, and again, I love doing these, and I always have fun talking with people about writing and stories and so forth. So I just thank you for letting me be on your show.
Well, I'm going to send you some links tomorrow or the next day to our show today. It's going to be up on my archive at YouTube, Media Cafe, Daily Motion, and the video is going to have my picture, your picture, and this show in it. The whole 9 yards turned into a video, and it's going to be where I have it all posted at. If you want to, save the links and bookmark them and go see who's been looking at it, who's been commenting on it or whatever, it'll be available to you. And when I do, maybe I could try to send you a November date if you want to come back in November, because I'm booked up until then.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to come back. Yeah, invite me to talk about whatever you want. I'd be happy to do that. And just to mention the links, when I always get a link for the shows, I always put them on my website. So I'm hoping I can return the favor, and so when people go on my site, they can find the link and then find your show that way, too.
Okay, I definitely do appreciate that. I'm always looking to get new listeners on my site. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it a wrap for the night so I can tell these people about the people I'd like to see them visit. And we'll talk at you at a later date. Thank you for a fantastic show, and I'll be in touch.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. Okay, everybody. Real quick, let me check my equipment. Make sure I have not disconnected myself by mistake. No, I have not. Now, it's pretty much the usual stuff, guys. I want to let you know my next show this Saturday is going to be Patrick Cook. He's a theologian and an author, and he's got more than one website. He's got more than one book. These guys, we've done shows before together. He's also a radio show host, and we don't usually always stay on topic. We tend to drift, so we'd probably cover a lot of information, and he's going to be my guest Saturday, September 22nd at 1 p.m., so I hope to see you guys there. Also, don't forget to visit World UFO Today. And don't forget to visit my friends in the menu on the left, the friends link. There's banners there. Just click on them. And you'll be able to go to Supernatural UFO and United Paranormal International. They're both great sites. Join up if you want to. The membership's free. Share information. Make friends. If you're interested in other radio shows, there's UKPN Radio with Gary Brown, JimHarold.com, and the Great Alien Report, Micah Hanks. And these three have already been on my show. They're great hosts, and I think you'd really enjoy them. Ohio Exopolitics Radio, Mark Snyder has not been on my show, but I've been to his show, and I think he's got a great show. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and call that a night, folks, and y'all take care, and I'll be back Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Oh, and by the way, I couldn't have a show without my listeners any more than I could without my guests. You guys, if y'all don't do nothing but listen, you're participating. I want to thank you. Keep coming, and don't forget to recommend my show to your friends. 7904. Mike, I got to tell you, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I want to thank you for looking me up over there at Blog Talk Radio.
Well, I just thank you for letting me on the air and talk about my stories a little bit, and maybe a little bit about writing, and just have a nice conversation.
Well, I got to tell you, you look like you've been doing some writing for quite some time. What do you have out now? Something like 4 books?
Actually, altogether, I have 5 books currently out.
Okay. And I noticed you had a list of your books on your website. I just got a miscount or forgot to count from the last time I was there. I got to tell you, I almost made a mistake. I had trouble finding your website because, there's a Michael Lynch that used to be the host of Paracast Radio, and I almost got the two of you guys mixed up.
Nope. I've never hosted my own radio show before, so that's not me.
Yeah, I know that. I'm just saying it's easy with the name similarity to make a mistake, though. But at any rate, real quick, why don't you tell everybody what it was that interested you in writing about this particular topic?
Well, for me, ever since I was a little kid, I love history. It's always been something I'm very fascinated with, and I was actually, when I graduated from college, I was a history major, and that has just continued on all my life. I love watching the History Channel, and that's kind of my go-to channel when I watch TV to see what's on, kind of thing. So I'm naturally drawn towards historical subjects just because of who I am. And it was, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was actually watching a documentary, I believe it was on the History Channel, and it was talking about Constantine's mother, Helena. Constantine was the first Roman emperor that embraced Christianity. He made it the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 300s. And his mother, Helena, converted to Christianity from what we would call paganism or Roman mythology. And she made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem around 326, 327, because for her, she read about many of the places in the Bible, and she wanted to visit and go to where Jesus walked and lived and did ministry and miracles. And when she
documentary, but I got to tell you, you and me got something in common. I used to spend much time in front of the History Channel. It was kind of like my go-to channel for a long time, until it seemed like I saw all the documentaries, and they were repeating, and I just got away from the TV altogether.
Yeah, well, they still have some good stuff on there. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff they show again and again, but they always come up with new programs that I pop into from time to time.
Yeah, I need to find a better way to keep track of it. But, yeah, is there any more parts in the book that was gleaned from history rather than, speculation or...
Well, there's another scene that we included in the story. It took place around 125, where there was a Jewish revolt that, because they hated the Romans, and they were trying to get rid of the Romans at every opportunity. And they first tried in 70 AD, and that's when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, and then the city was burned, and the population suffered, pretty cruelly under the Romans. And then about 50 years later, the Jews rose up again and rebelled against the Romans, and again Jerusalem was burned and sacked, and the governor at the time basically expelled all the Jews from the city because he just had enough, and we're not going to deal with this anymore, and actually changed the name for a time to something more Roman. And it was at that time that the Romans built the temple on the site of the crucifixion. So that actually did happen, and we include that moment of history in the story where it explains where the temple actually came from.
So that leads me to wonder if she did find, okay, you told me earlier, for example, before the show started, that you didn't know if I wanted you to mention this on the air, which I have no problem of it, about your theory about Helena finding a cross, but not necessarily a true cross. At the time, we didn't discuss this part having come, that much of it from history. If she did find 3 crosses underneath the temple, you would think that one of them would have to be the true cross, wouldn't you?
It is possible. It is possible. I'm not going to say I know everything about, Roman history or Jewish history and declare either way. That was the place where Christ was crucified was the place where criminals were crucified. It was outside the city, and that was the location that they did that. And so there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were crucified in that area of Jerusalem. And so it's very natural to believe that there would be crosses there that were not being used anymore, because I think they have the cross, somebody's crucified, they died, they probably used it again and again and again until it just wasn't useful anymore. You can only put so many holes in wood when you can't use it anymore, and they probably just cast them aside and just left them there because they didn't need them. And so I would imagine there'd just be leftover crosses in that area anyway, and just possibly that's what she found. Just
unless they took them down and stored them when they weren't using them and tried to keep them, which we have no way of knowing if they did that or not. Right. But the thought does occur to me that you'd think being outside like that if they weren't taken in, because, this incident with Helena, if I remember correctly from the book, happened in 1127, which was some 1,100 years after Christ's death. 1,100 years is a long time for wood to rot in the rain and termites to get it and stuff like that, if it wasn't being taken down and cared for.
Well, actually, Helena was in the 300s, so it was 300 years after the Christ.
You're right, because Constantine started Christianity in 365. I'm getting her probably mixed up with the Saladin story.
Right, yeah, Saladin. What happens is there was the Crusades. The Christian armies take Jerusalem back from the Muslims, and for about a little bit less than 100 years, they're in control of Israel.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. Joining me tonight is Mike Lynch. And if you want to learn more about him later today or, tomorrow or during the show, you can go to www.mikelynchbooks.com. Anyway, he's the author of After the Cross, and it was a very good book, I thought, in my opinion. In fact, it was reminiscent to me of some of the Dan Brown mysteries, which I've read all 4 of them. Well, actually, I think he's got 5 now, and including The Lost Symbol. But yeah, it was a very interesting book, a very interesting theory about how the cross could be found. But he did let us know that this is a work of fiction, and it's mostly for entertainment and speculation. But it's still a very, very interesting read, and one that I would definitely put into my collection, and it's got a lot of value in it to me. Now, also, for those of you that are listening at another website, if you want to listen over here, join our chat room. It's www.paranormalpalace.com. And the chat room is free, and the membership to the site is free, but you have to get a free membership and sign in order to be able to type and chat. It's for spam bot protection. And also, if you don't see the player, then that probably means your plugin is, you'd either have it downloaded the plugin for Windows Media Player, or the plugin is not yet enabled because in Internet Explorer, it comes as part of the browser, and it usually has a window pops up that asks you to install it. So you can always Google whatever the name of your browser is and ask for the plugin for ActiveX for Windows Media Player, and it'll take you to a download page for that. Also, if y'all want to call in, the call-in number is 832-632.
He was there. One of the places she naturally went to was Golgotha, where the crucifixion took place. And when she sees it when she arrives, she's horrified to find out that there's a Roman temple built there. And for her, that was just the worst possible thing that could have ever happened. And she orders it torn down. And as she tears it down, they find 3 crosses underneath the foundation of the temple. And they believe one of those crosses was Jesus' cross and the other 2 crosses belonging to the thieves that the Gospels describe. And so what they did was, according to the history, the documents we have, they find a woman who's sick, and they lay her on all 3 crosses, and on the 3rd cross, she's miraculously healed. And from that point on, that cross is referred to as the true cross, the one that Christ was crucified on, and it's kept in Jerusalem for many hundreds of years. And so when I saw this documentary, it just sort of got me thinking, it's like, what would it be like if this happened today in our time? If somebody actually found the cross or thought maybe the cross still existed, and as I thought more about it, I thought, what a great story that would be, and then, boom, there's the book.
So actually, at least that part of your book came from historical sources.
Yeah, one of the things that Brandon and I did, and Brandon Barr, he's the co-author. I wrote it with him. It's not just my book. We included flashbacks in the story that were primarily historical events of things that really did happen. So the first scene in the novel is the crucifixion of Christ. That's where the cross comes from. There's the Helena scene where she goes back and allegedly finds the cross of Jesus, and then there are other historical moments in the story, and those things really did happen, and we include them into our story to give it really a unique flavor of, that there is cross history that's written about that a lot of people don't realize that go beyond the Bible.
Well, I had personally read the story of her claiming to have found the cross. I had not known it in quite the detail that you had known it in, but I probably had not saw that particular